Thanks for joining us. Our host Matt Landes, LasVegasCris, and Scott Kellen will be in shortly to preview Week 2 plus Thursday night, and they'll go through their full Week 2 slate rundown this Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern, so make sure to tune in. What is the Ravens' reward after their stunning loss on the Raiders in OT on Monday Night Football? They open their home schedule Sunday against Kansas City Chiefs. Are the defending AFC North champs looking at a 0-2 start? That game will certainly be at the top of the NFL discussion. And speaking of Beltway teams, how will Washington fare Thursday at home against the New York Giants? We'll see what our cappers have to say.
This college football season, Gary Seegers, Kyle Hunter, and Parker Fleming will break down the games live every Tuesday and Wednesday on our BetUS College Football YouTube channel.
Hey everybody, welcome to the BetUS NFL Show. I'm your host, Matt Landes, joined by expert football handicappers LasVegasCris on your left and Scott Kellen on your right if you're watching us on YouTube. And Chris, let's get right to it. On one hand, it's overreaction week in the NFL. We're hearing that just about everywhere. And on the other hand, you've led the charge in saying we don't know quite as much as we think we do before the season starts. So we do still need to react, at least to some extent.
Yeah, you can't worry about second guessing yourself or overreacting and basically outmaneuvering yourself, so to speak, because some of the things we've seen are real and will continue. I think one of the teams that a lot of people are giving support to is Arizona. A lot of believers in the Arizona. So there's an example of, where they believe what they see. So no particular game makes me adjust a team too much. You have to give most teams a pass for the most part.
Yeah, Scott, how do you typically handle what's known as overreaction week in the NFL?
Yeah, it's kind of like Chris said. I mean, I'm feeling, and we'll get into it, I'm sure, but there's a couple teams I probably have maybe slightly underrated right now, so I might make a very slight adjustment. But at the same time, you have to kind of rely on your priors at the beginning of the season as well and have faith in them. And one game is really just against one opponent and really how good or bad that opponent is, and we don't quite know that to a full extent. So I think you got to be a little bit careful. You take some mental notes, get a few more games under your belt. You have a larger sample size to really hone in those ratings, and just be careful with what you saw in week 1.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to set the tone. And today we'll move along reviewing week 1 in the NFL and previewing week 2 right here at BetUS, where the game begins. And we'd also like to make this a Q&A with you, the audience. So if you're watching us on YouTube, feel free to jump in that chat, ask us anything. Let's have a good time. And that's the benefit of joining us live here. We can have that interaction in real time as we move on with the show. But before we kick things off, make sure to sign up today at BetUS using the promo code NFL2021 to claim your 125% sign-up bonus. And for more information on that offer, you can check out the link below this video. And now digging into our week 1 review, we can start by recapping some bets. And we're going to make this not just looking back at grading bets from the past week, but really to try to see what we can apply moving forward. And on that note, Chris, let's kick it off with you because you took the Saints plus the points last week, and that was an absolute home run from the start.
Yeah, I mean, that was very, very important for me. It was a first full-size bet, and I actually privately bet it for more than I probably should have. But I didn't upgrade the Saints because I think I kind of alluded to it on Friday. Hey, I'm still going to kind of believe in this team until I don't have to. And they came, they showed up. Winston had a great time. I have one NFL future, and it's Winston to win MVP. And he's got 5 touchdowns already. Forget that he only had 148 yards, but he can't win, but I took a shot. But I don't upgrade them because they're what I expected them to be, and Green Bay just gave up at some point. So distorted score there.
Yeah, and Scott, speaking of Green Bay giving up at some point, it might not be such a week in Wisconsin to go ahead and RELAX.
Yeah, they may have to WORRY possibly. And I don't know how much we'll learn this week, and we'll get into this on Friday, I'm sure, when we review the games. But playing Detroit, I'm not sure how much will be learned from that. But there are some serious questions on that offensive line that we need to get answers to. And they just did not match up to New Orleans' offensive line or defensive line. So more to come on that, and we'll see. But, there's some questions with Green Bay that need some answers.
Yeah, well, a couple more teams with plenty of questions swirling around them. Chris, your second bet of the week, the Jets-Panthers going over. Unfortunately, that one was a little bit DOA, but we might have learned something about one of the league's new rookie quarterbacks in week one.
Yeah, what we learned is how the hell didn't Carolina score more points on the Jets? I mean, there should have been more points scored. So that was very disappointing to not even sniff the total, but it's better than a bad beat, I guess. Disappointed in that play, frankly, and Carolina didn't really impress me. And the Jets are the Jets, but they did play better. They had a lot of good metrics.
Yeah, well, you weren't the only one to go down by taking an over, because I also had the Eagles-Falcons going over, and my takeaway there was it takes two to tango. The Eagles put 32 points on the board, but the Falcons, no touchdowns at home. And Chris, to steal your line, that might have been perhaps a bit of falling for the banana in the tailpipe with the first game in Arthur Smith's new regime.
Atlanta cost me dearly in contests. I didn't get a chance to even bet them, but I used them in all the contests, -3, and I was sucking wind on that.
Yeah, well, one thing I think we can dig into just a bit more on this game to, again, project moving forward. Jalen Hurts did look really impressive. The accuracy has been a big question with him, and he answered the questions at least pretty resoundingly positively in week one. Scott, what do you make of Jalen Hurts moving forward as far as that performance we saw out of him on Sunday, and also considering who that performance came against?
Yeah, I think we're going to learn more this week against San Francisco. The real question here is, was this because they played a crappy Atlanta Falcons defense and so he looked good? Still good to see him look good, but he's not going to be as good against stiffer competition. The other thing that's in the back of my mind, first of all, again, we know that Atlanta's defense may not be that good, but he only averaged 3.2 yards per air attempt, I think, and that's not a lot, and that's not a good sign. So we got to see if that changes a little bit as well. Otherwise, this is going to be a dink and dunk, and the good defenses, such as the 49ers, are going to eat that up. So we're going to learn a lot more this week, but those are a couple things that I'm kind of looking at to really try to get a better gauge on him and the team as a whole.
Yeah, well, we'll have more to touch on as it pertains to that Eagles-Niners Week 2 matchup a bit later in the show. But while we're recapping last week's bets, fortunately, it wasn't a bust across the board on the totals for us because, Scott, you had a rocking chair under in Buffalo, even though we saw a special teams touchdown.
Yeah, well, I wish they were all that way, Matt. But this game played out pretty similar to last year. I think it's 4.7 to 4.1 yards of play last year, 4.7 to 4.6 this year. I think 25-16 last year. There was an interception return. They missed an extra point on that. So it may have been 19-16 if you remove that. And here this year, 23-16, you get a special teams touchdown, ends up 16-16. Played pretty similar. And the interesting thing is last year, I think that total was 48.5. Very similar this year. Ended up very close to what it ended up last year for a final point. So it was very similar, just slightly different special teams touchdowns and defensive touchdowns. And, each team won one game.
Yeah, well, Chris, I know going into this Bills-Steelers game, it was interesting to see the market awfully high on Buffalo and myself included among the people that were fading the Steelers. So how would you look at the dynamic between those two teams after what we saw in Buffalo on Sunday?
I think it's awesome for football because Pittsburgh is going to be in the conversation, and I think that's good for the game, that they are not depleted as everybody thought that they might. And a lot of people are down on Josh Allen, but Pittsburgh's got that kind of defense that can do that. They held him to 55% completions last year, too. So you can't overreact to Josh Allen kind of stumbling against a tough Pittsburgh. Just concerned with how many times he ran it like a running back without sliding. I think he ran like 13 times. So a bit of concern there. But I was happy to see the result. I ended up betting Pittsburgh late, and that helped my day.
Yeah, and speaking of that result, I mean, I can be quick to adjust, I think, to entering the season holding a Pittsburgh regular season win total under 8.5 ticket. Yeah, that special teams touchdown might have helped swing the outcome of the game, but that was not a phony cover. And when we see a performance like that, I think it's important as bettors to at least be open to changing our minds pretty quickly. So definitely putting a pin in the Steelers week 1 performance. And one more week 1 performance that we had a bet on last Friday's show. And Scott, that's back to you. It was a pretty tough beat in New England where you had the Patriots.
Yeah, and I don't know what to think about this game. I mean, from a success standpoint, both teams are around 57% success. The stats would show otherwise from a yards per play standpoint and whatnot. It looked like New England dominated. They did have 2 turnovers, including a key turnover, I don't know, 5 minutes left or whatever it was, 6 minutes down around the 2-3 yard line, a fumble that Miami recovered. So that hurt. And it was I was pretty happy with what I saw from Mac Jones. But it was an uncharacteristic New England game. I think 3 15-yard penalties or so, the turnovers, which you don't normally see. I'm not sure if I was on the right side or the wrong side of that, because, again, I can see different metrics that showed in favor of both teams. So, I'd be interested to get you guys' thoughts as we go through the games today. But tough beat, knowing that we were about to go in for a touchdown possibly and would have got the cover.
I think you were on the right side there, Scott. The box score lied. If you looked at the box score and went up and down, you'd say for sure New England won the game. So I think it was the right handicap, but sometimes just stuff happens, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I think that gives us plenty to think about moving forward again as we not only grade the week 1 bets, but also figure out what information might be actionable moving forward as it pertains to those wagers. And there were also some games that we didn't bet on, guys, but they still left us with some actionable takeaways. And I think we can start with that season opener, Dallas and Tampa Bay, the teaser that pretty much the whole betting universe had on the Bucs. That either won, lost, or pushed, depending on the number you got with Tampa and when you bet that game. So, Chris, I think one of the takeaways, again, the value of shopping for the best of the number.
You got to shop like those women. Wouldn't have to shop your lines. It makes all the difference in the world. There was 2 games this weekend that it mattered, with Carolina and the Jets and the Tampa Bay game. The funny thing about the teaser I placed, I had Tampa Bay, San Francisco, and that big giant comeback by the Lions. I was actually rooting for my teaser to win in overtime. I wanted to see it go overtime and sweat it out and have them kick a field goal. So.
Yeah, that was a fun one. Well, let's go there for a moment, because that game between the Niners and Lions, again, that seemed like it was over without, a lot of time left on the clock, and suddenly the score tightened up quite a bit. So, Chris, as the resident Lions fan, you mentioned rooting for it to go to overtime, but at what point did you even start to take that possibility seriously? Because it looked like a done deal for a while.
It pretty much happened because I had marked that as a winner, and anybody that understands gambling superstition, I was actually responsible for that comeback for the Lions, and I had typed in that I had to send the result someplace, and I'm watching, and so I deleted it, and sure enough, they stopped, so it was over. So it was me completely on that game.
Yeah, that was a wild one. I mean, 41-17 at the 2-minute warning, and then you look up less than 2 minutes of game time later, and the Lions are driving to potentially tie the game. It never felt too precarious for San Francisco, but just to have to sweat it at all after a 24-point lead with 2 minutes to go, that was pretty wild. I will note the Niners won the yards per play battle by almost 3 full yards despite those endgame shenanigans. So still I think a pretty thorough dominance for the 49ers. And Chris, one of the key points for Detroit that we were looking at, their first-round pick, Penei Sewell. What do you make of his NFL debut?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Amazing, because Sewell was practicing for all of preseason as a right tackle. And Decker went out for the Lions at left tackle. They had to move Sewell there on an emergency basis. And who does he have to face? Bosa. And how did he do? He rated number 2 in the league in one metric and number 5 overall for offensive linemen for the whole week. So awesome. Lions fans are excited about that.
Yeah, sorry, Matt. I'll just make a point on that. I think Bosa told him after the game that he had noticed it on film that Sewell looked much more comfortable on the left side and really felt that he's going to do better on the left side than the right side. I mean, we'll see what the Lions do with that. But I thought it was an interesting comment from a pretty good player.
Yeah, and I was just going to say it's nice even to go down in defeat like that, to have something to look forward to for possibly a long time in the future of Detroit. Sewell anchoring that line. And while he looked good, Scott, I think you also have some numbers to reinforce the fact that that game wasn't as close as the scoreboard indicated.
Yeah, if you look at the halftime stats and just looking here, the 49ers were averaging 9.3 yards a play to 4.2 for Detroit. And so when I saw that, first thing, they had like a 70, 80-yard touchdown pass. So I'm like, oh, I wonder if that was factored into that, which sometimes can skew the numbers a little bit. Well, no, that came in the third quarter. So that was without that long pass. So, yeah, they were truly dominating this game. And then, things happen, right? And you get some boneheaded plays. And next thing you know, Lions got a shot. Chris is a a glutton for punishment. He's praying for overtime so he can win his teaser bet. Whatever, right? But yeah, I mean, it was a weird ending for sure.
The real bad thing though is the Lions lose Okudah, their number 1 draft pick from last year, cornerback for the season with an Achilles. So bad news.
Yeah, well, one game that didn't have quite a circus act of an ending, and I'll take it, a smooth ride for the Arizona Cardinals in Tennessee. That was smooth sailing for my bet, both on the side and money line. I mean, the handicap couldn't have come through much better, if only they were all that easy. But Chris, I know you were quite impressed with the Cardinals quarterback.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it in the AFC West preview that I had seen somebody on Twitter commenting how they'd like to bet against Murray winning MVP. Matt. Anyway, I guess he did okay considering Colin Cowherd was out there saying Murray looks like he's an MVP with his 5 touchdowns. People forget he was injured most of last season and how really dangerous he is. And boy, did I hate betting against him when he's healthy. He's never out of it, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, he's such a dynamic playmaker. And of course, part of the look against him at MVP was just the size and the way he plays over the course of a full season could get dicey. But in that matchup in week 1 at full strength, he was electric. And honestly, I'll just go ahead and let everybody know I didn't place that bet primarily because I didn't want to let a 15-1 bet sit for 5 months. That's a lot of money to tie up. If I could have gotten that graded immediately, I probably would have placed it. So perhaps this is the most grateful I'll be in my betting lifetime that some of these futures wagers do indeed tie up your bankroll for a while, because sometimes that just nudges you to stay off. So I'll sit back and enjoy watching Kyler Murray this season and hope for the best there. And Scott, on the other side of the ball, we also got some pretty encouraging signs from that Cardinals pass rush.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that last week with J.J. Watt, Chandler Jones coming back and company, that it would be interesting to see if they could get a pass rush. And they got a great pass rush on Tennessee and Ryan Tannehill. So we're going to see if they can duplicate it again this week. I know we'll talk more about it on Friday, but it'll be interesting to see what they can do against the Vikings as well. And that's something I'm very much intrigued by, because that can make this team a whole lot better very quickly if they can continue to get a pass rush and kind of help protect their secondary a little bit as well.
Yeah, one more note I'll share on this game. Of course, we talked about the side, but the total was a rough beat, maybe the bad beat of the week for overbettors. The total closed at 54, and there were 51 points on the board with more than 3 minutes to go, still in the third quarter. And that was all for the scoring. I think one of the keys here that I'll consider moving forward as far as Titans games go, Mike Vrabel and 4th down decisions, still a problem. In the playoffs, we thought he might have learned his lesson after punting on 4th and 2 from the Baltimore 40. That ultimately contributed to a Titans loss and ending their season last year. But here we are again, week 1, 4th and 1 at the Arizona 28, and Vrabel opted to attempt a 46-yard field goal with his backup kicker. That missed, and again, as a Cardinals backer, I was happy to see it. Even if they made the field goal, I would have been just fine without having to worry about the touchdown. Of course, if Vrabel goes for it there, they likely convert and at least are looking at an easier field goal, or perhaps they do get the touchdown. And that could have been the difference between the over pushing or even winning if Tennessee found the end zone on that drive, even if we factor in that there were no points scored in the last 18 minutes of that game. So I think that about ties things up for the Cardinals-Titans game in Nashville on Sunday. But another one on the, let's go a little farther to the East Coast, the Chargers at Washington. Chris, we saw one of the weird plays of the day involving one of the weirder rules in sports, and it kind of cost Justin Herbert there for a moment.
Yeah, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I had no horse in that race, so wasn't biased in the least. But Hebert goes down, throws the ball into the end zone, and the ball was touched, somewhere, beforehand, but the ball had a nice trajectory and just missed the receiver, rolls out of the end zone, and they call it a turnover touchback. One of the worst things I've ever seen. Just ridiculous.
Yeah, all I've got to say, and I, as the Chargers fan, I know I might be a little biased here, but I've kind of held for a while that might be the dumbest rule in sports, aside from it being a pretty clear incomplete pass in that case. Even if it were a fumble going through the end zone, I'm just surprised that rule is still in place, because we saw a very high-profile example last year in that Browns-Chiefs playoff game of a fumble going out through the end zone. And the NFL seems very open to changing rules when the opportunity presents itself and there's a good case to be made for making a change. I can't believe this rule still hasn't been fixed. I feel like it's a matter of time. I'm sick and tired of waiting for it to change. But in the meantime, I'm also glad that the Chargers could overcome that and win in spite of something like that. It might be a new era for them. And Chris, this might have been one of the first dominoes to fall as far as your Hindenburg angle on Washington.
The Hindenburg might be catching a little bit of a flame. I don't know. We'll see. If Washington does not win Thursday, whoa, it's going to be a rough season.
Yeah, well, no major moves, I think, in order for Washington quite yet. But we do have a few teams on the move, and this could be our segment looking at a few teams getting an upgrade or a downgrade after week one. And Chris, I know that you don't want to get too carried away with it, but there are some teams that you're giving a slight upgrade as well as a slight downgrade. So let's start with the teams that are on the move up in your book.
Yeah, again, very slight upticks. Pittsburgh, I had kind of mentally downgraded them. I can believe in them a little bit more. Arizona, I believe in a little bit more. Philadelphia really surprised me. I've got to really pay attention to them. I respect how well they played. And Houston, all the veterans, all the old timers. I was going to tweet out something about Cocoon. The old timers know what's going on. We all disrespected the fact that it's a veteran organization. Should have played them.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of talk about the Jags being favored by 3 on the road after going 1-15, and I guess we got our answer with that outcome. I will underscore your uptick for Pittsburgh, and I'll also add New Orleans to the mix for pretty obvious reasons after that game played out. And Scott, I know you've got some teams on the rise as well.
Yeah, Pittsburgh up as well. I agree. Saints, it's hard for me on that one. That's a team that I don't feel I have priced appropriately right now. And Miami falls in that same boat as well. I've got Miami probably lower than they need to be. So just because of that, I'm moving them up slightly. And after a couple more games, we'll see how far off I am on them. But I'm moving them up a little bit as well. More so, again, just because I think I had them priced incorrectly to start with.
Yeah, well, we'll be learning a lot, so plenty of adjustments to come throughout the season. And Chris, when it comes to the flip side of this coin, a few teams getting slight downticks in your book.
Just a little tiny downswing on Buffalo, but they could bounce back and recover. Tennessee really looks like they have some problems adjusting to the new offensive coordinator, but you would think that they're going to fix that problem. And Atlanta was the biggest surprise. I already mentioned that. What a disaster for me. And Green Bay, I got to keep my eye open on them. What really is the worst thing about that is they quit. And the Rodgers strut wasn't there, and he heaved a couple of passes. It wasn't pretty.
Yeah, well, Scott, it seems like we've got some consensus with you on a few of these downticks, but at the same time, no change on Buffalo for you.
Yeah, and by the way, on Green Bay, Chris, I don't know if they ever started, quite frankly. I'm just not sure. They almost didn't show up from the get-go. But, echo Atlanta. On Buffalo, I'm leaving them alone because, as I said in kind of review of the game earlier, this game kind of played out similar to last year, and the score was kind of similar, taking away an interception return for a touchdown on special teams. I mean, they both averaged roughly about the same yards per play. Pittsburgh did a little bit better this year than last year, so this is kind of what I expected out of that game. So no change for me in Buffalo yet.
You expected them to lose outright?
Not to lose outright, but again, 4.7 yards of play last year and this year. So they did nothing different from an offensive standpoint in that regard. They allowed Pittsburgh a little bit more, 4.6 yards of play this year versus 4.1 last year. But, again, if you take away that interception return last year, that's a 19-16 Buffalo victory. You take away the special teams touchdown, and I know it's not that simple, but then it's a 16-16 game this year. So I don't think it deviated that much from last year after 1 week for me to make any adjustments on it.
Yeah, I mean, I had them rated very high, and I think I mentioned that they could have some real problems this year, but when I look at their schedule, they really should go over. Now I question whether they're going to go over. That's basically what I mean by a slight tick.
I do think they may be a little too one-dimensional, which might come back to haunt them a little bit this year. That remains to be seen, but that could be one thing that flies in their face a little bit and causes some disruption versus what they did last year.
Yeah, I think suddenly a lot of intrigue for Buffalo after it was pretty much all optimism throughout the offseason. And I think you guys have covered this well. One thing I'll add a little bit of context to with the downgrades would pertain to the Falcons. Again, I'm maybe jaded because if they would have shown up at all offensively, that game probably flies over with the Eagles putting up 32. No touchdowns at home against that Eagles defense was a tough pill to swallow. And the Falcons getting outgained by almost 2.5 yards per play. In fact, their final 10 drives combined, they barely outgained each of their first 2 drives. So going to be looking for more out of Arthur Smith as he finds his sea legs with the Falcons. I think that just about does it for our risers and fallers after week 1. And at this point, let's move on to week 2 and get an early look at the board. And one of the first games I think we can start with, guys, would be the Saints and the Panthers. We saw that Saints line, just really take on a lot of steam, and rightfully so if you consider their performance on Sunday. Chris, how do you think this one ends up settling?
Well, we now have a COVID situation where I believe we have 6 assistant coaches and 2 players that have tested positive. And boy, we don't know how that's going to map out. So we saw the line jump up to 3.5 yesterday, and it went up to 4 this morning, and now it's dropped back down. So I think it's probably going to hover in that 3.5 range until more news comes out, because people want to bet the Saints, believe it or not. But it's going to get two-way action. There's people that like Carolina also that are using that excuse. Don't believe what you just saw and don't overreact. So it's going to get two-way action. It's going to be somewhere in that 3.5, 4 range, though, without any more COVID bad news.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something to watch out for. And Scott, I see a note here about you maybe rethinking your Saints rating a little bit after what we saw in week 1.
Yeah, I might have them a little bit low, so I'm thinking about that. And I priced this game at about a 0.5 point. So again, if I've got the Saints a little bit low, that makes sense. But also looking at like the season over/under win numbers, which you can kind of generate a power rating for each team, that would also price this game at about a 0.5 point, assuming you make no adjustments to what we saw in week 1. So, but I think I've got the Saints a little bit low. That remains to be seen. We'll see over the next couple of weeks, but those are my thoughts on the Saints right now.
Yeah, and I can see we do have a question from the chat that we'll get to in a bit. I think we can circle around to it at the end. So stay tuned, Birdie. Thank you for the question. But guys, one of the more interesting games, perhaps the most interesting game we can look at on the week 2 board in today's show would be Buffalo at Miami. Chris, I know you were a little bit perplexed when you saw where the line opened, and even to a degree where it sits right now.
Well, where do you guys think this line belongs?
Well, I'm going to give you a waffle answer here, Chris. It was probably not going to help you, so I apologize in advance. But, Miami, as I said earlier, is the other team that I've got probably rated too low. So I'm showing some value on Buffalo in that regard. But also looking at the season over/under win totals and deriving a line from that, again, without making any adjustments from week 1, would make Buffalo about a 1.9 point favorite. So, I could make a case for both sides. But it's hard for me to give you a great answer on that, just because I don't know that my lines are numbers are properly forecasted for Miami right now.
So yeah, that's kind of interesting. Here's some of the things that I do when I'm very, very line conscious. I really shop lines, and every 0.5 point is ridiculously important to me. So it's like watching grass grow all week, but I watch lines very carefully, and I try to figure out the logic behind them. So let's take a look at this situation. We just came from Buffalo, and Buffalo at home was favored by 6.5 to Pittsburgh. And when you were talking about Buffalo, Matt, you said that Buffalo might have been a little overrated or a little overpriced, right?
It's possible after that performance. Right. You got to think it's possible.
Okay, so you have a 6.5 there, and that's over Pittsburgh at Buffalo. Now, Pittsburgh beats them, and it wasn't close. I mean, it was semi-close, but it was a deserved win. And then they're going to go down to Miami. I'm going to repeat myself with the Saints from last week with Green Bay. They're going down to the heat and humidity in Miami. Miami, granted, they didn't win the box scores against New England, but boy, they played tough. They played a good game, and they came away with the win. Let's not forget something that's really important. Miami had a win total of 9.5. Pittsburgh, 8.5. So how do you send Buffalo down to Miami in not the best of conditions, and you're only going to and don't forget, both of these teams played tough games, so they're it's the equal letdown type factor. How does Buffalo only lose 2.5 points off a loss facing a better team than Pittsburgh? So that's why the 3.5 doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I think the logic is pretty sound there, and I'm by no means in a rush to back the Bills at this price, but to play devil's advocate a bit and try to think from the perspective of some of the market that hasn't brought this line down. Looking at Tua, again, it seems like everybody kind of sees whatever they want to see with him, and I'm not ready to judge him, for the rest of his career in any particular light, but his QBR came in under 40, and I know QBR is not the perfect stat, but directionally that means something. Coming in under 40 is a bit of an indictment. And the Dolphins had a continuation of some turnover and red zone luck that we saw from them last year. And we saw the opposite from Buffalo, where they were the team that allowed the special teams touchdown. They themselves only went 1 for 4 in the red zone. So I guess I just see that as a possible couple of factors that are keeping this number where it is, even though you've laid out some pretty sound logic.
Yeah, and this is really important. That half point makes all the difference in the world. And you're just losing value with this Buffalo right now, because everybody's going to be like, oh, there's no way Buffalo goes 0-2. Miami already has a win under their belt, and they aren't that good. They'll lay down for Buffalo. Will they?
Yeah.
Oh, they're not going to lay. They're not laying down. It's a divisional game, right? Now, people can make the, hey, they're going to be more focused. They lost. They need this game, which I don't really believe in any of that kind of stuff. But you'll probably hear that out there. But there's no way Miami's laying down against the team who's supposed to win that division. No way they're laying down.
Yeah, well, I think we can dive into this game even further on the Friday show, but we've given it a lot to think about for now. And another game that we'll probably circle back on in good detail on Friday with a pick. For now, we can touch on the 49ers staying back east, visiting the Philadelphia Eagles. And as far as that total goes, I bet the over 48 when it opened, but I can't recommend that anymore. At the current number of 50, I would say that's just a lean at this point. I mean, we've got two offenses, certainly with the potential to be dynamic, and both defenses looking a bit beatable, especially after the Niners suffered a tough loss, losing Jason Verrett for this season. As far as the side goes, though, Chris, I'm interested to hear what you think. I know you're a little intrigued by the number we're looking at here, with the Niners currently laying 3.5.
Yeah, my initial gut reaction was to be all over San Francisco like a bad rash. But, it's tough to lay that 3.5, and you just simply don't lay a 3.5 unless you really have to lay a 3.5. Because, what's your worst case scenario? You got to lay 4. So you don't win if it lands on 4. There's a big difference between losing the 0.5 point the other way, where if you miss the 0.5 point, now you lose. So you have a little bit of cushion there. But my initial reaction was that San Francisco should roll, ignore the end of the Lions game. Philadelphia's a pretender. But when you're looking at Philadelphia's metrics and how well they really did play, you kind of got to perk your eyes up a little bit and say, wait a minute. And I know San Francisco has some an injury concern that I wanted to find out more information on. But I think that line's going to kind of just hover there, and it's leaning toward the 3. So I have no rush to make a bet on it.
Yeah, and I might have jumped the gun. I went ahead and I have the Niners. I know it's 3.5. If it does stick down to 3, I'm happy to add on. I get the sense that if this game were kicking off now, you'd probably be inclined to back them, Chris. But to your point, with that asymmetric risk around the 3.5, there's no problem. Again, the mantra, hurry up and wait. We've still got a few days to see where this shakes out. And again, we can save more of the detail for Friday, but I will just quickly note that misleading final in Detroit might have brought the Niners down a bit too far in the eyes of some. I like that they're staying at the Greenbrier in West Virginia this week. They've proven that they know how to maximize the back end of those back-to-back East Coast road games. And to your point, Chris, we need to give the Eagles plenty of credit. They did show up and play well in week 1. At the same time, this could be quite a step up in class for them. So really curious to see how things shake out in Philadelphia come Sunday. And guys, one more game we can take a look at on the week 2 slate, if we can pull that graphic up again. And this is an interesting one with the Chiefs taking on the Ravens. Right now, the line sitting at Chiefs -4. That was initially available at some spots for -2.5. Of course, that's long gone after what we saw in last night's game between the Ravens and the Raiders. So Scott, what do you make of the number currently where it sits, Chiefs -4?
Yeah, I made it 4, so it's kind of come up to where I had it. The only other note I'll have here, I was on Baltimore last year. They played it on Monday night. I think Kansas City won that by 14, rather easily, quite frankly. And, you know, it kind of amazes me that Baltimore, obviously everything they do is about blitzing. And the fact that they continue to try to blitz Patrick Mahomes, because, you know, Patrick Mahomes, he eats blitzes for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He is just terrific at that. And if they continue to do that, I don't know if they can beat Kansas City by doing that. I really think they need to deploy a little bit different strategy there. But the number right now for me is sitting where I think it should be.
The blitzing is what got him in trouble last night against the Raiders. I don't know what the hell they were doing, but apparently they were telegraphing what they were doing, and the offense had an advantage with that. And they're blitzing on, you know, odd situations. Something's goofy with this Baltimore team. A lot of people say the exact same thing. It's not that they're bad. It's, boy, they didn't play smart. There's something different about it that you got to sit back and, you know, take a look at.
Yeah, well, once again, we'll do a deep dive on the full weekend slate on our Friday show. But for now, Chris, I wanted to see if you had any final thoughts on any other games we haven't discussed yet that you see possibly moving over the next few days.
You know what? If people are looking to place wagers quickly, I think the New Orleans game's going to stay where it is. I think Cleveland 12.5 will go up, if anything. Chicago 3 is the highest you're going to see it. I think it's only going to go down, if anything. There's more support for Cincinnati. I think the Pittsburgh line is stable. Buffalo may go up, but there is sharp support for Miami in some circles. The Rams is going to be very interesting. There's support both ways. The public's going to support the Rams big time, but I've already heard some sharps on Indianapolis. San Francisco, my best guess, maybe it goes down a little bit, down to that 3. Denver's stable. New England's going to go up from the 5.5. It should hit 6, maybe 6.5. Arizona's going to go down. Tennessee's going to get some support. And the Chargers, Dallas, boy, that's supposed to be 3. It's not going to move. Kansas City, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. That might actually go up. And Green Bay, if you're interested in that, it's at 10.5. I think that's the lowest line you're going to see. It's not going to go to 10. It's going to go higher.
Yeah, I love that rapid fire summary of what we can expect over the coming days. And Scott, one more thing while we're looking at week 2 lines. One factor that, of course, comes into play, unfortunately, but inevitably every season after week 1, some injuries that took place that could have an impact on some of these lines moving forward.
Yeah, I'll just quickly rattle off someone that either they're out for the year or projected to miss a few games here. So we've got with Tampa Bay, cornerback Sean Murphy-Bunting, Dallas wide receiver Michael Gallup, and Leo Collins, the right tackle, is suspended. They will get Zach Martin back at left guard, which is huge for them. The Jets lose their left tackle, Mekhi Becton. That's a huge loss for them. And also at least a little bit less of a loss, safety LaMarcus Joyner as well. And for Detroit, Chris already mentioned it. Okuda, the cornerback, is out. San Francisco, you mentioned it. Jason Verrett, the cornerback, is out. That's a pretty big one. Center for Seattle looks like he's going to be out. That might be a little bit underrated. Could impact them. Brian Bulaga, right tackle for the Chargers, went out. There's a chance he doesn't play. That guy seems to be hurt a lot lately. And we know Fitzpatrick is out. maybe a 2-point adjustment with Heineke, but Heineke with his mobility might actually, help them in some ways. And maybe it's not that big of an adjustment. I see Chris shaking his head, probably disagrees with that. So, we'll find that out. Cleveland left tackle Jedrick Wills out. That's rather significant, although they have a pretty good offensive line as a whole. New England right tackle Trent Brown. The Saints, Marshawn Lattimore hurt his thumb, and he might have to have surgery. He may miss a few weeks.
He had surgery this morning.
Yeah, that could be a little significant. Now, they do get Bradley Roby, who was suspended last week, that they traded for before last week, so he can at least fill in there a little bit. Jerry Jeudy out for the Broncos. And then last one here, Chicago left tackle Jason Peters. That guy's getting pretty old, and he may be missing a few weeks as well. Those are all ones that I'll be just looking at and checking the Friday injury report to see if there's anything different from what we know right now.
Yeah, more to come on Friday with any developments there, and more to come in a moment on the Washington quarterback situation that you touched on, Scott. But before we break down the Thursday night game, let's call a quick timeout and get into our Q&A from the live chat. We have a couple questions today from Birdie, and the first one I'll toss to you guys. Interested to know between the Titans, Mini, and Colts. So between Tennessee, Minnesota, Indianapolis, which of these teams are getting the most disrespect in this week's lines? Any initial thoughts there from either of you?
Boy, they're all about the same, but I think Minnesota and Tennessee are going to get the most support. I think the Colts, that line is going to stay pretty close to where it is, where Tennessee and Minnesota might get some more play than the Colts do.
Yeah, and I would say the Minnesota disrespect might almost be just higher upside potential for Arizona, after they performed very well and looked very good. So, yeah. The Tennessee one might be the one that's getting them. It's hard to say disrespect because who knows what we're getting with Tennessee this year. But to that point, they in my mind, they might be the ones getting most disrespected out of those three.
Yeah, you got two-way action on that where you got one team heading up, one team heading down. So that's probably one of these games that fits the overreaction category.
Yeah, well, Chris, your initial answer to the question, I think, leads us well into Birdie's second question. So I'll toss it back to you with this one. Why hasn't that Rams line moved yet? Your answer to my question will help a lot. So I think we see where Birdie's looking with that Rams-Colts game. But yeah, why don't you think that one's moved quite yet?
I think there is a group of people that are willing to take Indianapolis this week that's sharp. The Rams are taking it on the road. The Chicago was not impressive. I mean, it was really a joke. Talking about a no-show after that first drive and that first interception, what happened? And then even as poorly as they played, they actually had a chance to get back into the game later on. So, Stafford can throw his pop-ups to wide open receivers. It wasn't that impressive. The one thing that bodes well in their favor, though, is I was watching Cowherd and the gentleman was talking about they didn't even have to hit the playbook last on Sunday night. The Rams, played completely vanilla for the whole game and still crushed them. So that's the scary prospect with that. But Indianapolis has a way to disrupt certain teams. Seattle did well last week because of mobile quarterback, and the matchups weren't very good. This is a different situation. And the Rams weren't able to run the ball last week. So they've got a running problem, and that's going to change the dynamics of the Rams offense.
Got it. Well, one more question from the chat. This one coming from Patrick. Chris, I think this is well suited for you, but Scott, jump in if you do have any thoughts. And that would be early thoughts on which teams this week will be the consensus contest picks.
You know what? I'm sorry. I haven't even given it a moment of thought, and I don't want to waste the time now. Ask it in comments and I'll answer.
Cool.
Yeah, or on Friday, obviously we'll have a better idea on that too. Certainly we can pick that up Friday too.
Yeah, that's a better day to answer.
Yeah, so Patrick, feel free to come back to us on Friday or drop a note in the comments here, and Chris will check it out when the right time comes. I think, again, tying with the mantra of hurry up and wait with contest picks, still not due for a good few days now. We could be a little ways away from having a ton of clarity when it comes to some of the marquee contests, who it seems like the consensus players are going to be on. All right, so that's a few questions. Thank you to Birdie for your questions, as well as Patrick. I think we've got one more on the way, so I'll give us a quick beat here before we go ahead and preview that Thursday nighter between Washington and the Giants. You know what? Let's give this a sec. All right. I think we're going to move on. Let's break down the Thursday nighter, and if this question comes through in our separate chat that I am able to see here, we'll get to it. The Thursday night game this week, not the same as the season opener in terms of the marquee teams, but it could be a pretty interesting one nonetheless. The Giants traveling to Washington, currently the spread favoring the Washington football team at a juicy 3, -115, total a low 41. And Scott, when we've got a total this low, those points might loom large.
Yeah, they very much could loom large. And, Washington, I played Washington in a teaser last week. I was getting +1.5, so I teased it up to 7.5. And I was thinking after the fact, when that line went to 2 the other way, I could have played the Chargers on a teaser up to 8 because that was going to be a very close game. Washington's a good enough team. They're not going to get blown out in most situations. And also, I don't think they're going to blow anybody out. So for Washington, they're just that type of team. When they start laying points, you got to be very careful. So I lean to the Giants in this game. It's very hard for me to actually play the Giants at 3.5. There's obviously a little bit more value there versus the 3, even though it's juiced a little bit. Giants win last year, both games, 20-19. I think that one was in New York, and then 23-20 in Washington. Washington's got a better defensive line than the Giants. They've got a better offensive line. So I started looking at this. Well, why would my numbers favor the Giants a little bit? And I started looking. It's hard to say, but the Giants have better skill position players, I think, than Washington, and maybe even a little bit better secondary potentially, and that's enough to offset that and bring a little bit value back to the Giants. So if I'm playing anything, it would be the Giants. I don't think this line is going to go down to 2.5, but if it did, I'd maybe think about teasing it up. But I'd lean Giants, but I don't think I'll be playing Giants.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and pass on this one as well, but my lean would be on the side of the total. I would like to go under, but this, the number at 42.5, the best of the numbers already gone, and we're already looking at an awfully low number. There's one thing I'm going to be looking for on each side of the ball for each team that I'm interested to learn out of this game. And starting with Washington on offense, I had a bet on them in the first half last week, and it was already in jeopardy. And then when they lost Fitzpatrick before halftime, that kind of did things in. With Fitzpatrick on IR, I'm interested in what Heineke looks like as the starter this week. And I know we touched on it briefly earlier, but I'm hearing 2.5 points from some people. And at the same time, Scott, he might bring some upside to the offense that they wouldn't necessarily have with Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, I don't have the stats in front of me, but I don't think he got sacked last week while Fitzpatrick was taking a pounding back there. Some of that, obviously, they're just not blocking well and whatnot. But some of that's just a lack of mobility as well. So Heineke has the ability to get out a little bit, also pick up some rushing yards with his legs. So he does bring a different dimension to the offense. Obviously, the experience is not there of a Fitzpatrick, but sometimes when you're facing a really good defense, just having that mobility and escapability, if you will, can keep drives alive and might serve to help them a little bit, especially against a team like the Giants, which is not a top elite team that maybe confuses him a little bit more. And then you just think back. He played okay against the Bucs last year. Now maybe a little bit unknown for Tampa that caused some of that, but the guy's shown some potential to possibly be okay for him, short term at least, maybe not long term.
Yeah, I was surprised during that game, and I forget what the sources were, but I respected the sources that they weren't making any adjustment. They wouldn't be making an adjustment going forward. For the difference in quarterback, they say he's not that bad. He's serviceable and he's not mistake prone. And like you said, he's got some mobility. And I don't think that this is a typical heavy drop off that like they saw last year with Washington.
Yeah, and while we're talking about the Washington offense, another question just came in through the chat. I think I know the answer here, but I want to make sure I'm not missing something because the question asks, will Taylor Heineke deliver for Washington with Fitzpatrick out, or could Ron Rivera renew acquaintances with Cam Newton? I haven't heard anything about that. I think Heineke's been more than serviceable as a backup, so I would be pretty surprised if anything got in the way of Heineke starting, especially with this game being on Thursday with a short week. But am I missing anything, you guys, or are you also thinking it's going to be Heineke all the way?
Well, I don't think it's Cam Newton for this week. It's way too short a time for that. There was some talk about that. I think Rivera even made a comment, they'll look at it, the door's always open, but nothing's really changing. And then I saw another comment that there's quite a few coaches on that Washington staff that I think were with Carolina. And I didn't know what to take with the comment other than maybe those coaches don't like Newton or Newton didn't like those coaches. So, there's some dynamics there that could happen too. So we'll see. I mean, it's a good headliner because there's a connection there, but right now I don't think it's anything more than that.
Got it. Makes sense. Well, on the other side of the ball with Washington, something else I'm going to be looking out for is how they rebound after the Chargers in week 1 converted on 74% of their third downs. They went 14 for 19. And for a team with that many third down attempts, the Chargers posted the highest third down conversion rate in the NFL since 1991. I think that can be a pretty noisy number. I mean, Chris, you touched on it a lot before the season. The Washington defense might be in for some negative regression, but I'd be surprised if it were that much.
Well, we've said it. I've said it over and over again. I don't understand why everybody says this defense is so good. They gave up 424 yards, like you said, 14 for 19 on third down. They haven't shown anything. They really haven't. I think the defense is very overrated, and you just can't think that they're going to stop teams like we've been, forced down our throat thinking that they're as good as they are. They're decent. Don't get me wrong. They're just not, they're not going to be top 10 this year. And they're not going to sniff top 10. They'll be lucky to sniff top 15, in my opinion. But it should be interesting because the Giants actually had a chance going, and Daniel Jones ran it up the gut for 10 yards and just fumbles it again. And we talked about it during the previews. If he can just stop making the mistakes, the Giants are going to have a chance. They've got skill position players, as Scott mentioned, everywhere. So, but he made the mistake, and that made a difference in that game where they would have had some nice momentum. But if he stops the mistakes and they can get a little bit more rushing out of Barkley this week, they only had 60 yards rushing last week, so that's a concern. And I think he himself said he couldn't get up to speed. He couldn't get that extra afterburner going. So that's another bit of concern. So as far as this game goes, I would probably lean toward, if it's 3.5, I'd probably take, if I'm going to take a side, it's going to be plus the points.
Yeah, I'll add to your note about the Washington offense and Daniel Jones' supporting cast. With Saquon returning from injury, he will also be doing so on a short week with that quick turnaround Sunday to Thursday. And after he got just 10 carries in week 1, I'm curious to see how he looks again on short rest this week. And defensively for the Giants, I think that is expected widely to be a strength for the team. And I'm looking for them to rebound after allowing 165 rush yards to Denver. Scott, I know they had a long run they allowed to Gordon, and aside from that, their yards per carry was pretty good. But how do you reconcile the fact that we don't want to, just read too much into a 70-yard run that Melvin Gordon put on them, but at the same time, we can't act like it didn't happen, so we need to give it some degree of weight?
Yeah, you give it some weight. I mean, it was a 70-yard run, I believe. You take that out, it was 3.5 yards a rush, which is pretty good. I guess 165 minus 70 is 95 yards. You can't completely discount big plays, especially when they're coming from teams who have the capability to generate them too. But it is a little bit of an outlier that I try to look at both and just, look, if they gave up the 70 yards and then they're still giving up a high yards per rush, okay, well, it's not so impressive then. But you take that out, you just don't get those runs that often. So especially in a run, pass is a little bit different. You see those a little bit more often. You don't see it in the run so much. So I give them a little bit of cut them a little bit of slack there because I think as a whole they played pretty well, other than giving up that one run.
One last ribbon on the bow here. 36-23 time of possession. That's not a top caliber defense.
Right. And it wears you out, right? It's going to take its toll. And in that run, I think came fairly late in the game. I believe, I could be wrong in that, but that stuff can happen too when you're on the field for that long as well. So it's a good point.
Yeah, and when you talk about that time of possession, again, on a short week, that could really get magnified. Not only did the Broncos ground game do some damage, but Teddy Bridgewater seemed to have his way. So similar to the Washington defense, I'm looking to see what kind of rebound we can see out of the Giants defense on Thursday night. But yeah, after they were on the field for a lot of that game on Sunday, it might be a bit of an uphill battle for them this time around. I think that about wraps it up for our Thursday night preview. And at this point, we'll go ahead and thank you guys all for tuning in to the BetUS NFL show. For those of you joining us on YouTube, go ahead and give us a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. And if you have any thoughts or questions, let us know in the comments of this video. If you're listening to us in podcast form, feel free to also reach out to us on Twitter. You can find Chris at LasVegasCris. That's CRIS. Scott is at Sixth Sense NFL. And I'm at MLandis18. Last but not least, don't forget to use the promo code NFL2021 when signing up at BetUS to claim your 125% sign-up bonus. And that'll just about do it for us today. We'll be back with you live on Friday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific to break down the full weekend board. And we'll see you then right back here at BetUS where the game begins.